Hey, I did not post a video yesterday because I ended up staying an extra day, up in Burleson where I usually play cards. I ended up crashing an extra, I usually spend on those weekends, 2 days up at my grandma's to play cards and D&D, but I actually ended up staying an extra day to crash at a friend's place and hang out with her, uh, yeah, I just didn't get around to doing a video yesterday, which is gonna screw up my algorithm. But you know what? We're gonna make up for it, and we are gonna post. We're gonna post hopefully two videos today. So this should be the first one, and then we'll also publish. We'll go back to publishing once a day for the rest of the week. So we will make up for yesterday's lack of an upload. Today we are continuing the series we were working on last time, which is uh, Extra History, the First Crusade. So we're gonna be doing part 3 today. Yeah, let's get into it. I'm really excited for this. Like I've mentioned before, this is something I haven't seen in a long time, and we are still pulled up to the second one. So let's pull up the third part and get started. It gets a little loud. Turn that down just a smidge.
Last we left off, the disastrous People's Crusade had met its end at the hand of the Seljuk Turks, and Peter, along with the few thousand remaining of those who joined him, were hiding out in Constantinople awaiting the arrival of the real Crusaders. Today, finally, that real crusade will begin. But before the First Crusade can begin in earnest, the Crusaders have to get to the Holy Land. And to do that, we have to recognize one very important point about the First Crusade that's often overlooked. The army of the First Crusade isn't actually one army at all. Rather, it's at least 5 separate armies.
I think I mentioned something about this in the last part. It was either the last part or the part before that. I mentioned something about the fact that even among the main actual Crusaders' army, they were coming from you gotta remember, they're coming from all over Europe. So these are coming from I want to say 4 or 5 different countries. I think 4. I think they came from 4 different countries. So, I mean, obviously not everybody's going to be on the same page. I mean, most of the time people aren't on the same page within their own country. So to have such a large army, there was no way it was going to be one unified army.
Led by 5 different men from 5 different parts of Europe. Each of them set out from 5 different starting points with the idea that they'd all meet up in Constantinople and move on to the Holy Land from there. The first army is that of Hugh of Vermandois. This was the smallest army, although arguably the noblest of the noble armies, as Hugh was the brother of the King of France. Which was a bit awkward, as the Pope had recently excommunicated King Philip I of France for adultery, but hey, why let fraternal excommunication get in the way of a good crusade?
Yeah, that's the other thing you gotta remember is I don't think there was ever any chance of all of these armies, staying as one the whole way down either. I believe they have at least 2 different points where they end up with certain groups splitting off. 2 or 3. It happened a couple of times, even during the First Crusade. Because the thing is, I mean, like he's mentioning, everyone had their own political interests and different, viewpoints on each other. So getting these people to all work as one was never going to work for long.
Now, from Western Europe, there are basically 2 ways to get to Constantinople. Travel over land through Hungary, or head to Italy and travel by sea. Hugh chose the latter of these 2 options. Unfortunately, his tiny fleet was hit by a storm, and he lost a good number of his ships. But eventually, the Byzantines fished the remaining Crusaders out of the Adriatic and escorted them to Constantinople, where Hugh promptly sent a message to the emperor that read, "Know, O king, that I am king of kings, and superior to all who are under the sky. You are now permitted to greet me on my arrival, and to receive me with magnificence, as befits my nobility." Needless to say, the emperor was not impressed.
That is the most pretentious letter I've ever heard of. I think that is one of the most pretentious letters in all of history. I think it would be hard to find something that's half that pretentious. That's funny though.
The second army on our list was that of Godfrey de Bouillon. He represented the German contingent of the Crusades and brought a sizable force from the Holy Roman Empire, which is only a little bit awkward as he had actually fought against the Pope when the Pope and the Holy Roman Emperor were duking it out, and in fact, he directly helped kick the Pope out of Rome, but hey, why let a few armed legions supporting the anti-Pope to kick the legitimate Pope out of Rome get in the way of a good crusade?
I have a feeling we're gonna end up with like 4 of these. What was I gonna say? This goes back to what I was saying a second ago about them all fighting each other just like a few years before. Like these are not a unified force of any kind. It's just a bunch of people who somehow managed to get fidangled into coming together to fight a common enemy. And it's not even like a common, like they're starting the war too, which is really funny. Because I mean, they like normally when you see like giant, continents worth of people coming together to fight a common enemy, you've got situations like the Persian invasion of Greece, where the different city-states came together not because they wanted to, but because they had to survive. But this is a lot different of a situation where they're the ones starting the fight, which, if anything, just drives down any unity factor they had going for them in the first place.
I let a few armed legions supporting the anti-Pope to kick the legitimate Pope out of Rome get in the way of a good crusade. He and his brother, Baldwin, leaving from only about 200 miles south of where Peter's crusade set out, decided to take the same route that Peter did. But this time, when the King of Hungary saw a group of crusaders pulling up on his doorstep, he was like, no, 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 no. But after a lot of talking, the King of Hungary finally allowed Godfrey to pass through on the condition that Godfrey's brother Baldwin and his entire family stay as hostages. After making it through Hungary without a single looting, Godfrey planned to resupply at Belgrade, but wait, no, Peter had burnt that to the ground. Oops. Now, our poor beleaguered...
Yeah, they kinda got screwed. That whole People's Crusade kind of threw everything. I think I mentioned this during either with the first part or the second part, but the People's Crusade tore havoc on the supply lines. It was really bad.
Byzantine governor must have been preparing himself for yet another round of terrible conflict with the Crusaders, but Godfrey's army, like a champ, managed to make it through to Constantinople with only a tiny itty-bitty bit of pillaging. Next, we have the army of Bohemond.
Which they would have had to, because there was nowhere to resupply normally like they'd originally planned. Like, they didn't have a choice. If they wanted to keep moving, they were going to have to take something from someone. They just didn't have any choice because of the lack of supplies.
Of Taranto. The force he brought was smaller than most of the others, but it was by far the best armed and the most experienced. Which is a little bit awkward because most of these troops got their experience trying to conquer the Byzantine Empire 12 years before. But why let unprovoked acts of naked aggression and the near unseating of the very ruler you're now supposed to go help get in the way of a good crusade? So, after sailing across the Adriatic and a ponderously slow march across the Balkans, where their men occasionally wholesale looted the very same people they looted a decade and a half ago.
That's hilarious.
Go in the war.
Not quite a decade and a half, but I get your drift. Yeah, that is really funny though. Yeah, but again, they would have had to loot at least a little bit to fix their supply lines, because supply lines were really, really bad thanks to the People's Crusade before. So pretty much all of these forces are going to have to do at least a little bit of pillaging and looting, unless they just bought a metric ton of supplies, which I don't think any of them would have been able to. I don't remember if any of them actually managed that. I think for the most part, they pretty much all had to loot the places they were trying to help, because they didn't have any supplies. Because the People's Crusade had already wiped out most of the supplies in the area, so now they're just fighting for scraps.
Bohemond and his nephew, Tancred, finally made it to Constantinople. After Bohemond, we have the army of Raymond, the Count of Toulouse. Raymond led the largest army and what can be considered the principal crusading force. As such, Raymond considered himself to be leader of the crusade, which is only a little awkward as he traveled alongside Bishop Adhemar, the papal legate assigned by the Pope as the leader of the crusade. But Raymond was also old, missing one eye, and stated that he hoped to die in the Holy Land, so why let a little leadership dispute get in the way of a good crusade? Raymond and his forces chose to follow the overland route to Constantinople. Unfortunately, when they got to the Balkans, they ended up passing through a lot of the same territory that Bohemond did, which meant that the people there were hostile, and the land was already stripped bare. This left Raymond's gigantic force hungry and grumpy, and by this point, we all know what hungry, grumpy crusaders do. During the pillaging, Bishop Adhemar was wounded and had to stay behind for a bit to recover. What's more, Raymond was called off to Constantinople to meet with the emperor personally, leaving no one really in charge of the largest crusading army. This huge unsupervised army then managed to get itself in a tussle with Byzantine forces, and, as is the pattern, got itself routed. But eventually, Raymond's remaining men limped their way to Constantinople. Lastly, we have the army of Robert of Flanders, who surprisingly had nothing awkward going on at all, as his father had gone on a pilgrimage to Jerusalem a few years back, and had fought for Alexius Comnenus on the way, leaving the family on good terms with the Byzantines. Like Bohemond...
At least someone was. At least someone was. Which is honestly a miracle given the constant conflict nature of this time period. It's honestly amazing that they had even one army that was legitimately on good terms with.
Hugh, Robert also decided to try his hand at the sea route, and surprisingly, he managed to make the crossing to Byzantine territory without losses. Even more surprisingly, he managed to make it all the way to Constantinople without any major reports of pillaging or looting.
There probably was at least a little bit of pillaging or looting going on for him, but it was probably places that had already been ransacked, and he was just getting the scraps that were left over. So he probably just managed to do it more covertly than others. But again, if he didn't lose any ships on the way, he might have also just brought a lot more supplies comparative to the size of his army than any of the others did. I don't know. But either way, he did better than anyone else has so far.
But there were two other fellows leading this crusading army along with Robert. One Robert of Normandy, just to make things confusing, and a Stephen of Blois, both of whom were relations of William the Conqueror. They decided that the crossing was too risky and that they were going to wait until spring to cross. That would generally be a wise decision, though in this case they would end up losing one of their ships where Robert had lost none. And while they waited in Italy, a fair number of crusaders decided that a winter in Italy isn't what they signed up for, and deserted. Alright, I think that's everybody. Now that all the crusaders are in Constantinople, the real party starts. At least for the leaders of the crusade it does. You see, Alexius Comnenus, being a savvy guy, basically trusted none of these people. So he decided that before he'd ferry them across the Bosphorus, he'd get all the leaders to swear that as they crusaded, they would return any previously Byzantine territory they conquered to the Byzantine Empire. That's the entire reason Alexius got this ball rolling in the first place, after all. As you can imagine,
that was the personal interest that led to this whole thing.
Didn't sit well with some of the crusading leaders, so Alexius decided to talk to them privately, one by one. It turned out that Hugh, in this as in most things, was a bit of a pushover. Godfrey, on the other hand, turned out to be absolutely bonkers. He just straight up refused to go to the imperial palace to meet with Alexius at all. So far as I can tell, he didn't really give any reason for this either. He had come all the way to Constantinople, and now he just sat outside doing nothing. Emperor Alexius finally decided, okay, I'll send Hugh to talk to him, I guess. But when Hugh showed up, Godfrey called him a lackey and refused to deal with anyone less than the emperor. Okay. This weird standoff continued until, finally, after Alexius cut off the supplies he'd been sending him, Godfrey's troops attacked imperial troops. There was a minor skirmish, Godfrey's troops lost, and so far as I can discern, Godfrey just instantly caved. The emperor gave Godfrey a small mound of treasure and basically just said, "Get out of here," and booted his forces over the Bosphorus. Okay, that's 2 down. Now it was Bohemond's turn, and he was a wily one. Now, whatever else you may say about Bohemond, he was charming, intelligent, diplomatic, and shrewd. Alexius knew that Bohemond probably wasn't there just out of crusading zeal, as this was the same Bohemond who had tried to dethrone him a few years ago. Alexius was bracing himself for an argument to get Bohemond to agree to give back whatever conquests he might gain on the crusade. But Bohemond was one step ahead. He agreed right away. Of course he would take the oath. But since he was being so forthcoming, wouldn't it make sense for the emperor to name him as the leader of the crusade? What? Alexius stumbled for a moment here, but he too was a savvy and shrewd man, and so rapidly regained his bearing, said something non-committal like, yeah, I probably could, hang on. and then quickly shuffled Bohemond off to a room literally overflowing with gold and jewels and silver, and basically said, "What? Look at all this annoying treasure just clogging up my otherwise lovely room. Wow, that's a nuisance. If only I had a buddy here who could cart it all off for me after saying one measly little oath." And measly little oath.
Or when nothing else works, resort to bribes. It almost always works. That's kind of funny, but yeah, no, I mean, at the end of the day, if I'm leading a crusading army and I've got my own personal, interests, but at the same time I'm not too tied to any one like faction or anything, and I get offered a mound of treasure the size of a room, yeah, I'm just gonna go ahead and take it and move on.
Were indeed said. But this whole time, Bohemond's nephew Tancred was outside with the army, miles from the city, and so managed to just sort of never take the oath himself. This may end up being relevant to future extra history episodes. Raymond was next.
And by maybe, they mean it almost certainly will be. In fact, if I remember correctly, Tancred does end up taking a city at some point.
He met with the Emperor, but
I want to say 2 cities. I want to say he took 2 cities and just kind of tried to keep them. I don't remember how that ended for him, though.
Flat out refused to take the oath. He went on a whole spiel saying God is my only leader, and that he would not swear to such a thing. Eventually, Alexius managed to get him to at least swear to an oath of brohood. A broth, if you will, proclaiming that Alexius was his bro forever and that he would help him wherever he could, especially against that weasel Bohemond. Alexius eventually said, "All right, good enough," and sent him on his way. No presents for you, though. Presents are for people who swear actual oaths. Lastly, of course, there was Robert. Their conversation boiled down to, "Are we cool?" "Yeah, we're cool." Then Alexius showered him with gifts and said, "Go get him, Tiger."
Yeah, I mean, that's the easy one. He's on good terms with that family anyway, so there's no reason for them not to just come to an agreement and move on.
And thus began the First Crusade. Seriously this time, the First Crusade is actually beginning now. Next week, we'll see them march off into Turkish territory, fight battles against people who aren't supposed to be their allies, and actually retake land for Christendom. See you then.
All this, and they're just now finally, all that nonsense, and just now, at this point, this is when they finally managed to actually start the crusade. Yeah, the First Crusade was a mess. Actually, ironically, I'm pretty sure the First Crusade is the least of a mess out of all of the Crusades. Well, it's the most successful anyway. I don't know that strictly that the others are, less messy. They may be a little more clean cut, but they're still very decisive losses. Whereas this one ends with not a victory, but not really a loss either. It's kind of complicated. I'll explain it more in future videos. But yeah, this was good. Of course, go check out Extra History if you want to, see more of their stuff. They're a great channel. That's going to be the end of this video. But I will see you guys later today for another part. Peace.